Logan Devereaux stood in the heart of Manhattan's grandest ballroom, draped in gold and crystal, where chandeliers glittered like stars frozen in time, and laughter flowed like expensive champagne, masking the hollowness of privilege. He wore his confidence like a tailored suit, pristine, impenetrable, but beneath the designer tuxedo was a man numbed by excess, surrounded by people who fed off spectacle, not sincerity. His friends, a circle of charming vipers, thrived on humiliation dressed as humor, and tonight, bored and brimming with arrogance, they lit a spark that would set destinies ablaze. "Dare you, Logan," one sneered, lifting his glass. "Strip that shy little waitress. Make the crowd roar. Make the night legendary." Logan chuckled, not because he wanted to, but because his pride wouldn't let him walk away. His blue eyes flicked toward the waitress in question, a fragile figure in black and white, weaving through laughter and luxury with her eyes downcast, clutching her tray like a shield. And something inside him paused. She wasn't like the others. There was a calm tragedy about her, like a violin played in a burning room, beautiful and out of place. Her name tag read Serena, and the name suited her. Soft, serene, almost ironic against the backdrop of cruelty she was about to face. He approached, pretending amusement, but deep down he felt a strange resistance stir in his chest. She looked up as he blocked her path, her eyes wide and hazel, filled with quiet strength and the unspoken exhaustion of someone who'd fought battles no one applauded. "Excuse me," she said, steady despite the tension cracking the air, and that simple phrase sliced through Logan's ego like a whisper in a storm. The crowd turned, phones ready, expectations thick in the air like fog on a battlefield. "It's just a dare," someone laughed. "Nothing serious." But Serena's dignity rose like a wall. She didn't tremble, didn't run. Instead, she looked Logan dead in the eyes, and what he saw there silenced the roar inside his skull. Something ancient, something sacred, something no money could buy. Her lips parted, and though her voice trembled at first, the words landed like a slap that turned into scripture. "You can undress my body, Mr. Devereaux, but you'll never be able to touch my soul." The room froze. Laughter died. Even the music seemed to stumble. Logan's smirk evaporated. Something unspoken passed between them, a connection not forged by flirtation, but by fire, by defiance, by purity wrapped in armor made of pain. For the first time in his glitter-drenched life, Logan felt stripped himself, exposed, unprepared, disarmed. Serena walked away without looking back, disappearing into the folds of velvet curtains and shadows, but her presence lingered like perfume in his lungs, intoxicating and impossible to ignore. He couldn't move, couldn't explain why his heart pounded, as if he had just lost something he never even knew he needed. His friends laughed off the moment, shrugged it off as her being uptight, called her frigid, but Logan wasn't laughing. He stood still as a realization coiled around his ribcage. This wasn't a game anymore. That woman had flipped the script, undone him with a sentence, exposed the emptiness beneath his charm. The dare meant nothing now. The girl, everything. And somewhere deep inside him, a battle had begun. One between the man he pretended to be and the man Serena's eyes had accused him of being. That night didn't end with applause, but with a silence more deafening than 1,000 cheers. And as Logan left the ballroom, his reflection in the glass doors looked unfamiliar, haunted by hazel eyes and words that would echo in his mind long after the night lost its shimmer. "You'll never be able to touch my soul." Logan had walked out of that ballroom with a smirk wiped clean from his face and something heavier than shame weighing down his soul. An ache that grew louder with each passing hour. For the first time, a woman hadn't just turned him down. She'd left him questioning who he was, and that discomfort dug deep into his chest like a splinter under skin. Her name, Serena Vale, echoed like a haunting refrain he couldn't silence. And before he realized what he was doing, he was combing through employee records at Devereaux Enterprises. A man used to collecting things now, chasing something he couldn't name. She wasn't listed as a full-time staffer, only a part-time temp under event contracts, a ghost in the system, barely there. yet more real to him than the women he'd slept beside in silk sheets. Day after day, he hoped to glimpse her again. And when he finally did, it wasn't under chandeliers, it was under storm clouds. Rain pelted the city like shards of glass that afternoon as Logan stepped outside his glass tower and saw her across the street, soaked to the bone in a flimsy coat, holding a bag of groceries that ripped at the bottom, sending apples rolling into traffic. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply crouched on the sidewalk, hair plastered to her face, trying to gather what little she had, and Logan felt something break open in his chest. He crossed the street without thinking, his umbrella forgotten, raindrops blurring his vision, and when she looked up, hazel eyes burning like broken lanterns, he saw pain carved into every inch of her expression, not from the rain or the mess, but from years of fighting battles no one had ever offered to help her win. "Why are you following me?" she asked, her voice low, exhausted but not surprised, as if being hunted was simply a part of her existence. He tried to explain, but his words came out like apologies too late for old wounds. He offered her a ride, but she refused. He offered to help carry her things, and this time, reluctantly, she allowed it. They walked in silence, her sneakers slapping against the wet sidewalk, his polished shoes splashing in puddles that now felt like mirrors reflecting who he was becoming. Her apartment was in Brooklyn, far from the sleek skyline he was used to. 4 flights up in a crumbling building with rusted banisters and flickering hallway lights. Inside, the air was thin and smelled faintly of lavender and old wood. A girl, maybe 15, sat on the couch humming to herself, wrapping and unwrapping a rubber band around her wrist. Her eyes darted, untethered and lost. But Serena greeted her gently, her tone shifting from guarded to nurturing in seconds. "This is Ellie," Serena said softly, placing a hand on the girl's shoulder. "My sister." Logan finally understood. The bags under her eyes weren't just from work. They were from the weight of guardianship, of being both mother and sister in a world that barely gave her room to breathe. Over tea served in chipped mugs, Serena opened up, but not easily. She told him about their mother, a school teacher who died 2 years ago from ovarian cancer, whispering to Serena on her deathbed to never give away her body until it was to someone who truly saw her soul. Since then, Serena had lived like a warrior in disguise, juggling 2 jobs, skipping meals, dodging advances from men who saw only her curves and not the ocean of resilience behind her eyes. "People think being untouched is a weakness," she said, not looking at him, "but sometimes it's the last gift you have left to protect." Logan didn't respond with charm or pity. He simply listened, really listened. And for a man who had spent his life speaking over people, that was a revelation in itself. Everything about her story bent the edges of his world, forcing him to see beyond champagne and billion-dollar mergers. She didn't want his money, didn't care about his name, and that made her dangerous in the most magnetic way. He left that night not with digits in his phone or promises of another meeting, but with the image of her closing the door gently behind him, as if guarding the fragile sanctuary of her life. And something inside him knew that if he wanted to ever be welcome again, he'd have to show up not as Logan Devereaux, the millionaire, but as a man willing to be vulnerable. The dare had been a joke, but this was a descent into something that both terrified and liberated him. Serena had shown him a mirror, and in it, he saw a stranger he didn't recognize, but might want to become. And as he stepped into the night, the rain felt less like punishment and more like rebirth. The rain had barely dried from Logan's shoulders before the chill of something deeper began to settle in his bones, something heavier than weather: truth. He had stepped away from Serena's door, but not from her world, and over the following days her silence transformed into something softer, something that unfolded slowly like old pages of a forgotten book. It began with a text, just a single line of one of her poems, and then another, fragments of her voice arriving like whispers in a storm, haunting yet healing. When she finally agreed to see him again, it wasn't over wine or in some penthouse, but in a quiet bookstore near her neighborhood, where the dust smelled like memories and stories clung to the walls. They sat cross-legged in a forgotten aisle, surrounded by paperbacks and poetry, and Serena, for the first time, let herself speak. Not out of obligation, but because something in Logan's eyes no longer demanded, only received. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened a tattered journal from her bag, the cover soft and bent from years of being clutched like a lifeline. I started writing when my father left, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He used to be a musician. Drums, jazz, too many bars, too many women. One day he said he was going on tour, and he never came back. Logan didn't breathe. Her words cracked like dry branches, but she didn't cry. Her pain was too old, too practiced. Mom tried to keep it together, Serena continued, but cancer doesn't care about broken hearts. I watched her fade, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but promises she made me swear to keep. Her poetry, dozens of raw, bleeding verses, spoke of abandonment, of sleepless nights spent starving not just for food, but for stability, of learning how to be a child and a parent all at once. Logan listened as if her words were holy, his heart breaking open under the weight of a life he'd never known, a strength he'd never had to possess. But Serena wasn't the only one haunted. Logan bore his own shadows. One night, as they walked through Central Park beneath a sky blotted with stars and history, he confessed his truth. Delilah was everything I thought I needed. Beautiful, polished, from the right family. But she was also cold, calculating. She said I was too soft, that love made me weak. He hesitated, swallowing the ache in his throat. She left me for a man I'd trusted with my company. They tried to dismantle me from the inside out. I wasn't just betrayed. I was gutted. Serena didn't flinch. Instead, she placed her hand gently over his. No words, just presence. And somehow that silence meant more than pity ever could. But Logan wasn't done. He spoke of Charles Devereux, his father, a titan of industry and terror, a man who believed empathy was a defect and shame was motivation. I once cried after my dog died, Logan recalled bitterly, and he said I'd never survive the business world if I couldn't bury my feelings like a man. That night, Serena wrote a poem for Logan, just 4 lines, but it carved into him like scripture. You are not soft, you are soil. That is why hearts grow near you. Their pain had found a mirror in each other. Scars no longer sources of shame, but signs of survival. And just as Logan began to believe in something fragile and blooming between them, the past crept in through the back door like a thief. One of Logan's oldest friends, Mason, drunk on envy and bitterness, found Serena alone in a cafe one afternoon, and with the venom of someone who'd never earned anything honestly, leaned across her table and said, "You know you were just a dare, right? A stupid game. That's how it all started. Ask Logan if you don't believe me." The words struck her like a whip. Her face paled, but she didn't let Mason see the tremble in her hands. She stood, left her tea untouched, and walked out into the evening without calling Logan, without rage or confrontation, only silence. That night, Logan waited for her call, checked his phone every 5 minutes, wondered if she was asleep or writing, but the absence grew too loud. When he visited her apartment, Ellie answered the door, eyes red, hands twisting nervously. "She's gone," she whispered. "Said she needed air, but she didn't come back." And just like that, she vanished, taking with her the poems, the promises, and the echo of a connection Logan had only begun to understand, leaving him alone in the doorway with nothing but guilt gnawing at his throat, as the realization sank like stone in water. His silence had cost him something pure, and the girl who once dared him with her soul had walked away without saying goodbye. The silence that followed Serena's disappearance wasn't just quiet, it was suffocating, thick with the weight of words unsaid and promises shattered without a sound. Logan, once the man whose voice could command rooms and close billion-dollar deals, now sat speechless in his own penthouse, staring at unopened curtains and wondering how a girl who lived in shadows could leave a void so vast it echoed inside his chest. The world didn't stop for heartbreak, not even for millionaires. Yet Logan found himself skipping meetings, ignoring calls, brushing off board members whose respect once meant everything, all because the one voice he longed to hear had gone mute. He sent roses, handwritten notes, poems he rewrote from memory, each one softer than the last, each one a plea stitched into petals and ink. But Serena remained a ghost. Her apartment was vacant, the landlord indifferent, her number disconnected, her sister taken in by a group home, guarded tightly under a new social worker's supervision. Logan hired a private investigator, not to stalk but to search with the desperation of a man who knew he'd broken something irreplaceable. Days bled into nights, weeks folded into each other like grief on a loop, and still, nothing. And then something shifted inside him. The man who once defined worth by wealth began to understand a harsher truth. Love isn't earned by diamonds or gestures. It's built by presence, by truth, by change. So he stripped away the layers of ego that had once armored him, stepped down from company meetings, stopped signing charity checks with press cameras flashing, and instead, he started showing up, really showing up. He volunteered at kitchens in the Bronx, scrubbed graffiti in shelters, donated his time instead of his fortune, sat with veterans and orphans and women escaping silence, like Serena once had. At first, he did it to feel closer to her, but over time, something inside him changed. It stopped being about her and started being about becoming someone she'd believe in, not just love. He wasn't looking for redemption in headlines, but in the quiet smiles of strangers. One Sunday afternoon in Queens, he visited a nursing home that needed books and warm hands. He brought a box of novels, but as he stepped onto the garden path beside the old brick building, something familiar stole the breath from his lungs. There she was, Serena, sitting beside an elderly woman in a wheelchair, her golden brown hair pulled back in a loose braid, her voice low, steady, reciting lines of poetry to someone who clung to every word as if they were medicine. She hadn't seen him yet. Logan froze, afraid that if he moved, the moment would dissolve like steam. She wore no makeup, her dress simple, worn, but to him she was a cathedral, sacred and impossible to look away from. He didn't rush forward, didn't call her name. He stood beneath a tree, watching the way her eyes lit up when the woman smiled, and it struck him. This was who she'd always been, the soul beneath the armor, the heart he never truly saw until it was too far to touch. He wanted to run to her, to fall on his knees and confess everything. But he knew better now. Serena didn't need fireworks. She needed truth. So he waited until she stood, kissed the woman's hand, and turned toward the gate. And that's when her eyes met his. The air between them charged with every memory, every tear, every word left hanging in the space where love had almost taken root. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She simply looked at him as if reading a story she'd already lived and barely survived. Logan stepped forward, slow, cautious, as if approaching something fragile. His voice broke when he finally spoke. "I've changed. Not for you. Because of you." Serena didn't answer. She walked past him, then paused, barely glancing over her shoulder. "Change means nothing if it's too late," she said, and disappeared down the sidewalk, leaving him not in silence this time, but in awakening. And for the first time, Logan understood that becoming worthy wasn't about earning her back. It was about becoming someone she never had to run from again. Logan didn't follow Serena down the sidewalk. He simply watched her disappear, swallowed by twilight and the hush of passing cars. His heart lodged somewhere between regret and hope. But he didn't chase, not this time, because he understood now that love couldn't be demanded, only deserved. Hours passed before she messaged him a single line. "If you still want to talk, meet me where the city breathes softly." He knew exactly where. An old cafe tucked between a bookstore and a florist, the kind of place untouched by time or noise. That evening, as he stepped inside, the scent of vanilla beans and old paper wrapped around him like a childhood lullaby. She was already there, sitting near the window in a simple ivory dress that hugged her like peace itself, her hair falling freely, untouched by pretense. For a long moment, they said nothing, just sat across from each other while the soft glow of string lights above painted halos over broken dreams. Her hands clutched a chipped mug, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight so tender it felt like wind trying not to disturb a sleeping soul. "Why me, Logan? Of all the women in your world, why the girl who had nothing?" He didn't hesitate. His answer rose from somewhere raw, somewhere real. "Because you're the only woman who ever made me feel like more than what I pretend to be. With you, I don't feel rich. I feel real." Her eyes shimmered, but not with pride or satisfaction, just sorrow mixed with grace, the kind of emotion that comes when a wound realizes it's finally being seen. After coffee turned cold and the silence turned sacred, they walked in rhythm under the night sky, the world somehow quieter around them. When they reached her building, he didn't ask to come up. She opened the door herself, looked at him once with trembling certainty, and nodded. Inside, the apartment hadn't changed. Still small, still fragile. But tonight it held a warmth that neither of them understood until their shadows blended on the wall. There were no kisses stolen in haste, no hungry hands, just music from a dusty speaker, piano keys humming softly. As Serena curled beside him on the couch, resting her head against his heartbeat like she was trying to memorize its rhythm. He didn't touch her skin to claim it. He touched her soul to understand it. With every whispered apology, she peeled away his arrogance, his layers of self-defense, and with every tear she blinked away, he felt the icy walls inside him melt drop by drop. He undressed her gently, not her dress, but her history, her doubts, her bruised trust, and in return, she reached into the hollow corners of his past and placed her light there. They didn't make love. They made peace. No fireworks, no tangled sheets, just two hearts, speaking without sound, two spirits trying to believe that maybe, just maybe, the world had carved them out for this very moment. And as they lay there, her hand resting over his chest, her breath sinking with his, Logan realized healing wasn't loud or fast. It was slow, almost invisible, like the way dawn touches the sky long before the sun appears. That night wasn't about pleasure, it was about surrender. And somewhere between silence and softness, they began to rewrite what love meant. Not as possession, but as presence. The fragile stillness that had wrapped Logan and Serena like a second skin shattered without warning when Delilah Cross returned like a shadow that refused to stay buried. Her designer smile sharpened by bitterness, her envy dressed in diamonds and venom. She hadn't just come back to haunt Logan, she came to humiliate him. With a single calculated interview on a morning talk show, she exposed the origin of it all, the dare that started everything, spinning it not as a story of redemption, but as a cruel conquest, painting Serena as a naive girl who'd fallen for the oldest trick in the book. Headlines exploded like landmines. Billionaires bet ends in bed. The truth behind Devereaux's latest love. Photos of Serena, at cafes walking to work, sitting with her sister, were splashed across gossip sites like she was a celebrity scandal, not a human being. The internet turned ruthless. Strangers mocked her, called her a gold digger, a desperate virgin who threw herself at power, and worse, they turned her poetry into memes, mocking the very lines that once healed her. Serena's sister Ellie was followed by reporters outside her group home, frightened and crying as flashbulbs attacked her fragile sense of safety. And though Logan tried to shield Serena with silence and legal teams, the damage had already wrapped itself around her life like smoke in a locked room. What broke Serena wasn't Delilah's voice. It was the seed of doubt Delilah planted and the deafening noise that followed. She began replaying every moment, wondering if love had been a mask, if sincerity had been scripted, if the man who held her so gently had once laughed at the idea of her. Logan tried to explain, to reach her through doors and texts and handwritten letters, but pain had thickened her walls beyond reach. One night, as the city roared beneath their rooftop, she faced him, eyes burning with betrayal and disbelief. "You wanted to undress me, Logan," she said, her voice cracking beneath the weight of shame. "But you left me exposed to a world that eats girls like me alive." Her words struck like glass to skin, sharp, cold, and final. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away, as if his touch now carried poison. She didn't slam the door or scream. She just left quietly, her presence folding into the night like a chapter unwilling to be reread. Logan stood there in silence, the kind that didn't echo but collapsed in on itself, knowing this time wasn't just another goodbye. It was the consequences catching up to a man who thought time could outpace truth. But even as the city mocked his name, even as his empire trembled beneath false headlines and public disgrace, he refused to let this end in silence. Not this time. not her. The world had become a storm, but Logan stood at its eye, not to run, not to shield himself, but to face the chaos he helped create. The weight of Serena's last words clung to him like wet clothes, each syllable echoing in his bones as he stood before the mirror on the night of the biggest charity gala of the year, adjusting a tie that suddenly felt more like a noose than a symbol of status. The ballroom was draped in gold and ambition, filled with the same elite faces who once dared him into darkness. But tonight, he wasn't there to entertain or impress. He was there to confess. Cameras flashed. Reporters murmured. The microphone waited like judgment incarnate as Logan walked on stage, his heartbeat loud enough to drown out the orchestra, the chatter, even the thunder rumbling outside like the night itself remembered. He paused at the podium, thousands of eyes watching, millions more behind their screens. And for the first time in his life, he let his walls down, not with practiced charm, but with naked honesty. I'm not here tonight as Logan Devereaux, CEO. I'm here as a man who made a mistake, a cruel one, a dare, a joke, a moment I thought would disappear like all the others, he began, voice steady but raw. But instead I met someone who rewrote everything. The crowd hushed, wine glasses frozen midair, forks pausing over filet mignon. I dared myself to undress a woman for fun, he continued, his voice trembling now. And instead, she undressed my soul. She didn't give me her body. She gave me something more terrifying, truth. She taught me that love has nothing to do with wealth, that dignity is priceless, and that forgiveness is the bravest thing a human being can offer. Gas fluttered through the audience, but he didn't stop. Serena Vale, this is for you. I am sorry. Not in the way men apologize to clean up messes. I'm sorry because I finally understand what I broke wasn't just your heart. It was your safety, your trust, your silence. And you still stood tall. You didn't just walk away from me. You walked through a fire I started, and you didn't burn. You rose. His voice cracked, but he held on. Tonight, I'm not asking for a second chance. I'm offering my life in place of a promise. I may never be perfect, but I swear, I will never stop becoming better. For you, for your sister, for every poem you've ever written that I didn't deserve to hear. He stepped back, chest rising and falling like he'd just poured his soul out for judgment. And in that golden silence, no applause came. Only stunned stillness. But somewhere miles away, in a worn apartment where paint peeled from the corners and a candle burned beside a sleeping girl, Serena Vale sat frozen in front of her flickering TV screen, hand pressed to her chest, tears streaming down her cheeks like something sacred had been unleashed from its prison. She didn't wipe them away. She let them fall, each one a memory, each one a battle, each one a part of her that remembered what it felt like to be seen without being wounded. She didn't know how long she sat there unmoving as the broadcast ended and the world moved on. But the knock at her door brought her back. It was soft, familiar. And when she opened it, the past met the present like lightning striking the same heart twice. Logan stood there, no umbrella, no driver behind him, no polished lines, just rain cascading down his soaked suit, hair clinging to his forehead, eyes begging without a word. For a long moment, neither of them moved. She could hear the storm behind him and the silence between them, both waiting for a choice. Then he dropped to his knees, not out of guilt, but devotion. This time, he whispered, rain pooling beneath him on the mat, I don't care who's watching. I don't care what it costs me. I dare the world to witness me fall in love. With you, only you, forever. She didn't speak. She didn't ask questions. She didn't test his sincerity. She looked down at him, at the man who had once bet against her worth and now laid everything at her feet. And slowly, without drama or hesitation, she reached down, took his trembling hand in hers and gently pulled him inside. The rain stayed outside. The noise stayed behind. And as she closed the door with her other hand, the lock clicked not like a barrier, but like the sealing of a new beginning. Inside, no grand declarations followed, just quiet, warmth, her forehead pressed against his breath shaky against her cheek, as the storm outside raged and healed in the same rhythm. No velvet gowns, no red carpets, no crowd, Just two souls that had been stripped, broken, forgiven, and finally beginning to rebuild.